I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Dawn Porter, whose new film, The Lady Bird Diaries, premieres November 13th on Hulu. And Dawn, Lady Bird Johnson is somebody that I think a lot of people think that they know, but I don't think they realize how much she kind of revolutionized the role of a first lady. And so I'm curious as to what were some of your takeaways in doing this kind of deep dive into her.
Yeah, it's funny. I've done a fair amount of work in documentary studying this era. So I did a series, Bobby Kennedy for President, 4 hours. I did a film about John Lewis, whose civil rights activity happened during this time. And, I think I didn't really know that much about Lady Bird. If I knew anything, it was that she did beautification. She planted some flowers. And what we learned as we first, led by her diaries, she was a really meticulous journalist. And she really did an incredible job of revolutionizing the East Wing. So one of the first things we learned is that she insisted that the East Wing staff have a staff and that it be paid. And she hired women. So she hired Liz Carpenter, who became her press secretary. So she really professionalized the East Wing and made it what we think of it as today. But she also was a very close strategic partner for Johnson. She wrote drafts of his speeches. She critiqued his speeches. She is actually the first lady to go on a campaign tour alone, campaigning for the president. She does this whistle stop tour through the South. And I think most people think of Eleanor Roosevelt when we think of people going to campaign. Eleanor Roosevelt really campaigned while FDR was president. But Lady Bird Johnson specifically sent her into very hostile territory, if you think about it, he needed to keep the South, he needed to keep the Black vote, but he couldn't alienate the white vote. And so who does he send? His most trusted advisor, Lady Bird, through a multi-state tour through the South. So there's many, many things that she did that we don't think about.
Well, and one of the things that was interesting to me was there's that moment early in the film where she talks about how she and LBJ really didn't want to be in this position. They didn't want to be involved in this, and yet she kind of took to it so well.
I'm so glad you noticed that. I mean, it's really in some of the opening minutes of the film, and it's very telling. She starts her diary just a few days after JFK is assassinated. And if you think about that perspective, we've never had that perspective before from the person in the car behind JFK and Jackie as Kennedy was assassinated. So what she says in that first diary entry is she's speaking to Jackie Kennedy. And she says, we didn't even want to be vice president. And that's how close Lady Bird and LBJ were and how they thought of each other. They were a we. So, we think about that. And then she says, really quickly, I felt like I was in a part that I hadn't prepared for, but she rises to the occasion. And that's very much what we see of Lady Bird.
You brought up the whole thing about her critiquing him. One of my favorite parts is her critiquing his speech, that phone call between them where she gives him like a solid B+.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we don't hear those conversations between presidential husbands and wives.
Yeah. No, we really don't. And maybe it's happening, but we don't always know that it's happening. And so, one of the things, Lucy Johnson, both daughters have been incredibly supportive of the film, and they've been to multiple screenings with us. And one of the things that Lucy told us is that her parents did that to each other all the time. She loves that part of the film. She would say at dinner, they would critique each other, like he would critique her performances as well. But you see, Johnson's recording, and so because we have the benefit of having those recordings, that's another thing Lady Bird did. Lady Bird is the person who gave the instruction to release Johnson's tapes for the public because she was a journalist and she wanted them to be available for all of us. So, but you see, that's a very regular routine thing that she did. And, for the State of the Union that time, he only got a B+.
I also love the fact that you put that part at the end where Barack Obama is talking about Michelle criticizing him the same way. It's like something's never changed.
Never.
From a formalistic style, at what point did you decide that this film was going to literally just be the tapes? There were so many avenues you could have taken. At what point did you decide it was literally just going to be the tapes and the footage?
Yeah, that really happened as we started doing the archival research. And like I said, I had done a lot of work in this era before, so I knew that there was a lot available. But when we started to research in order to find out, this came to me because ABC called and said, we have this podcast. Do you think it could be a movie? So the first thing you do is you see, well, what do we have? Because of course, Lady Bird is no longer with us. So we started doing the archival research, put in her name, and the first, queries came back with like 2 pages. I'm like, that is impossible. How does the First Lady of the United States in this era of television not have more archival footage? So we put in the term Mrs. Johnson a little bit more. And then we just realized that we could use her diary entries. She would record reporters who were at each of her events. And so when we went back and said, Lady Bird recorded Nancy Dickerson from NBC News was here, we went to NBC and said, can you give us all of this footage? All of this material showed up. And so I kind of wanted to make the not so subtle point that she wasn't even identified in a lot of the archival notes where she was front and center in the footage, that we had enough footage, enough existed to make an entire film about a person. But if you were just doing a basic archival search, you would not know that she existed in so many of these moments. So it really was, I don't know, kind of a little feminist, kind of point. But I think also artistically, I was really I was interested in the challenge. Like, could we actually do this? And the reason that we could do it is because she was a very meticulous journalist. And so if you notice, when Lady Bird is describing something, the footage matches so exactly. And that was like so delightful that we just were like, let's keep going. But pretty early, I was like, all archival. If we don't have the archive, a few times we do the hand-drawn illustrations. But other than that, it was all going to be her voice telling her story. And that's because women are erased from history so often that I wanted to kind of make that point.
Well, and I think that's exactly kind of the key point that I took from it was so interesting in this time, which is kind of like just kind of pre the main part of the feminist movement, and to hear a woman in this position who was not always thought of, women as the First Lady were not always thought of as being, active participants in the administration. And yet here we have a woman who supports her husband, but is tough with him and has her own ideas. And I think hearing that hearing her own voice gives it that kind of gravitas.
I think it does. And she noted so many remarkable moments, the things that she observed. I think the other kind of benefit we had is this is a very well documented time in history. I mean, we're talking about, 1967, 1968, one of the most significant times. MLK is killed. Bobby Kennedy is killed. Vietnam is raging. The news networks are starting to cover the presidency and cover politics on a daily basis. So Lady Bird is coming into her own at this transformative time in history. And so, we have the benefit of being able to see, with our own eyes. And, this film, it was really, really important to me that people get to see for themselves. We are living in the age of disinformation where so many people are giving their spin on things. And so here with this film, you can see she doesn't always, she's not a perfect person. She doesn't always make the choices that we hope that we all would make. Of course, none of us are perfect, but you can kind of, I hope, get a fuller sense of why she's making her choices, where she's struggling. I love to see people struggle, like who has all the answers? It's so much more interesting to see people struggle and come out wherever they come out. It was really a pleasure to be able to to live in this time period. I think the other thing that having just her voice and the archive does is it allows you to kind of go back in time and you stay in the time period. You're not pulled into the present at all. And like, who wants to be in the present right now?
Well, but that's also very interesting about her because, LBJ died so shortly after
Yeah.
they left office, and she lived another, 30 some odd years,
Yeah.
40 years after that. And after listening to all this footage, I'm sure you must feel like you get a sense of her. What do you think was kind of the secret to her kind of longevity and her strength?
I think, she grew up in East Texas and we had a lot of scenes early on that we cut for, sometimes you have to cut your darlings kind of thing, where she spent a lot of time outdoors. She was a very active person. She was a swimmer. She loved nature. And she was really, really cognizant of mental health. She suffered from depression just like LBJ did. And she notes, like both of their bouts with depression. But I think, I guess like for all of us, it's some good luck. What I think is really, really remarkable is when she first discusses with Johnson, when they're first strategizing about whether he's going to run again after Kennedy dies and he fulfills that, she writes this famous Huntland memo where she says, what you should do is run one more time, and you should run now and then one more time. And then you should resign in March of 1968 and not run again. And that is exactly what happened. So that is her strategy memo of one of the most significant things that could have happened. Who could have known that Bobby Kennedy would emerge, but then be murdered? Who could have known that Humphrey would not be able to overcome Nixon? What if, what if, right? So Nixon becomes president and the course of history is changed once again.
I wanted to just very quickly ask about, you mentioned the illustration portions. What was the genesis of those ideas? Because to me, they're completely fascinating.
Thank you. I love those so much. That is from my partner in crime, Molly Schwartz, she's just brilliant. And we've collaborated on a number of films together. So there were some scenes where, my background is in journalism. I used to work for ABC News. And so accuracy is really, really important to me. And we fact checked everything really rigorously. So there were some scenes that we felt were really important, but we didn't have a lot of materials. But we wanted to include them. Eartha Kitt, Eartha Kitt confronting.
I love that section. I love that section so much.
Is such a, how did I not know this story where women were protesting outside of the White House after Eartha Kitt was treated poorly by the Johnsons? Like, wait, what? So for that, we had pictures of Eartha Kitt in the White House. We had pictures of Lady Bird, of course. So Molly, those are hand drawn, and then she illustrates them. But we researched, for the Jackie Kennedy illustrations, for example, we looked and said, what month did this phone call happen? Would Jackie still have been wearing black? Would she have been wearing a veil? So there were just some moments where I think also like kind of filmically, it gives you a little break from the archival world, which as much as I love it, like you do kind of need just a little bit. You need a little bit of like a little breath. And so those moments where you're just reveling in the detail of the drawings, I think it gives you just like a nice bit of, time to enjoy the scenes and her voice really, and Johnson's voice too.
Just to kind of close it up, as I was reading about LBJ and Lady Bird after watching this film, I love to look at where the rankings of where these famous figures kind of rank in historical terms, and it's always interesting that Lady Bird is right up there at the top. In the top 2, 3, 4. Why do you think she continues to endure with that kind of reputation?
I think because Lady Bird, it's a job she didn't audition for, but she took to it, and she, like everything she did her best. And I think she continued even after the presidency, for several decades being in public life. one of the really fun facts I love is because of her work she was an environmentalist. And because of her work, Johnson signed 300 bills to protect the environment. She was talking about climate change. So there were many, many things that Lady Bird had the foresight to address, that I think we're just now also recognizing how prescient, her warnings were. So I think if you know, and so now I hope with this film, a lot more people understand the contributions of this remarkable woman.
Yes, when you know, except when people cover their eyes and don't know. Um, Don Porter, thank you so much. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season, and stay tuned for more interviews to come. Don Porter, the Lady Bird Diaries premieres November 13th on Hulu. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited about this film.